Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Riskologists. I'm your host, Andy Haslam, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Val Jonas. Val, welcome to Riskologists.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So how's your podcast game? Have you done anything like this before at all?
Well, I've done quite a lot of speaking and webinars and things like that. So this one, for most people listening to it, they at least don't have to look at me, but and I don't have to worry about that. But I have to say, I love doing these things.
Excellent. Well, welcome along. We usually like to start off the podcast with a bit of a journey to date for you. So a bit of a timeline of your career, where it all started, maybe a bit of a journey up to the recording today. So fire away.
Okay. All right. Well, I think you've got a little mini podcast on me from last year's Project Expo.
We do.
Which you people can listen to, but in that I explained that I kind of fell into risk management like an awful lot of people do. I had by accident ended up doing a maths and computer science degree, which then I was looking for a job, and this one just intrigued me. I didn't really know what it was. Started working for Risk Decisions as a software developer, and felt at home, loved it, and never looked back. I suppose I'm a problem solver at heart, and that really sort of feeds into the whole thing about building software and working with customers to use it. So initially I worked on actually developing our Predict software, and gradually got to going out with companies, working with them, helping them implement it, and I've been doing that for 30 years. It was initially with people at a sort of an analytical risk analysis level, and then gradually moved to big mega programs and projects. And I then felt like the thing that I was quite interested in was looking at the future, and started to help people looking at strategic risk at the level of business cases, portfolio level, how it can save you money, but not just that, how it can help with innovation. And since I'm a problem solver at heart, that just really fed into what I just love doing. And I find risk management exciting and fun. It's all about solving tomorrow's problems and trying to create a better tomorrow, I suppose.
Excellent. Well, I think I agree. There's a lot of people like myself who and you who've fallen into risk management. I think it tends to find them as opposed to you finding it to start with. So it's very similar to a lot of people out there, I think. So we'll get going into this, and we normally mention at the start of these things as a bit of the topic that we've chosen to discuss today, which is a C-suite perspective on implementing practical risk management. We obviously let all our guests take the opportunity to choose that topic and discuss it on the podcast. But can you give us a bit of an insight as to why you've chosen that topic, and why it's particularly pertinent to yourself?
Okay, well, I think it's probably because I've experienced risk and trying to implement risk at all levels in organizations, within the companies I've worked in, and also within our own organization, Risk Decisions. So I'm CEO of Risk Decisions. I started out as a software developer, as I explained, and worked my way up through technical director, and running a company which expanded, in my time, we expanded it globally. So it's kind of punches above its weight. But I do really understand how difficult it can be implementing risk management. It's a very simple concept, and everybody thinks they know how to do risk. But actually, one of the most difficult things is applying it and doing it top down. Unfortunately, most organizations really struggle to get C-suite involved. They don't know how to engage them. And what I'd like to think is I could bring some of my experiences, both from doing it ourselves and also helping customers implement risk successfully. I hope that might give some people some ideas and insights.
There's not many people in your position where you're related to your actual risk manager, or you're a risk professional, but you've got your own business, and you have to look at it from that perspective as well, and swap between those hats, I think, of the boss and the risk manager, the risk professional. So we'll get straight into it, really. You mentioned it then before about some of the mega projects and things like that. You've been managing projects and strategic business risk decisions for years, but can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, I mean, I guess really we got into it big time, and I got really interested in helping projects, and in that area of risk, it's perhaps a bit closer to what everybody thinks of ISO 31000 risk against objectives. And there you can pin things down quite easily, because with a project, you're trying to deliver a set of deliverables. And then at a program level, you're trying to deliver benefits. And so they're quite easily defined. You can specify cost and time and scope, and those are all written down. You have a plan, so you've got a structure against which to put risk. And we also decided at a very early stage that because we were rolling out risk management and risk analysis software, we would also use our software on our own projects, whether it was our internal product development or implementation for our customers, because I believe that you have to put your money where your mouth is, or just be the person you're telling other people they should be. Actually do it yourself. One of the things we also learned was how to take risk. That risk isn't just about preventing risk, because actually projects are all about opportunities and change and exciting innovation, and you can't actually usually do a project. Most of our customers are huge infrastructure, transport, defense companies, utilities, and so on. Now, they are doing very exciting technologically challenging projects. So you end up inevitably taking risk. So I found all of that very exciting. It was from there I started thinking about business risk, though. And for a small company, you kind of think risk every day, because it's part of survival. You don't have anybody ready to hand out money to you at the end of the month, or you live on your own wits, you make your own luck. You find your own opportunities, and I again found that really, really exciting. But one of the things I discovered was that openness and trust, having risk conversations, they were all key ingredients. And of course, the same is true for larger organizations. But perhaps we'll come back to compare those things a bit later on. But certainly, we felt that as a risk management company, we couldn't maintain credibility with our customers unless we actually did risk well ourselves. But it was mostly project and strategic risk. The interesting thing that we found recently is we've just gone through ISO 27001 certification, and that really opened our eyes, because operational risk is quite a different kettle of fish.
So you mentioned then about operational risk. How does project and business risk differ from operational risk?
Well, as I said, it's a bit easier to understand ISO 31000 when you're doing projects, because where it describes risk as the uncertainty, the impact of uncertainty on your objectives, and you can easily define objectives in a project and change risk. It's a bit more difficult to define that in operational risk, and I think that's one of the interesting things I've discovered. I do work on one of the ISO committees on the project program, the value guide we're helping write at the moment, and that's kind of looking at what other bringing experience of what other disciplines find difficult about risk management is interesting. And even project risk delves into other areas of risk, because projects and change, on an infrastructure project, you still have to keep people safe. You still, in any organization, particularly technology, or even more so utility companies, they have to maintain very strong cybersecurity. So even when they're implementing things, they still have to do all this other operational risk. So it actually made me start thinking a bit more about how the whole thing joins together from an enterprise. And of course, that's one of the very difficult things for companies and organizations. Too much risk is siloed. And we found this when we were implementing ISO 27001, which is much wider than just cybersecurity. It covers all of your processes around HR, training, legal, your supply chain. I didn't realize how big a thing it was until we got into it. And the shocking thing I found was that we were presented by the consultants who were working to help us go through the change. Was they gave us loads of spreadsheets to fill in, and it was death by spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Now, I could understand with some things spreadsheets are a good way of doing things, but usually when you want to add up numbers or do sort of quick and dirty things. But what I realized was that, first of all, it just wasn't going to work, because these spreadsheets all had different ways of doing things, and it just didn't make sense. I mean, they had all sorts of, each one was designed by obviously a different person in a different discipline. So the legal spreadsheet risk register was completely different from the supply chain one, was completely different from the information management systems one. It was just a mess. And also from a matter of point of view of pride, professional pride, I could not use spreadsheets when I tell everybody you shouldn't use spreadsheets. You should do it in a central system like our Predict system. So yeah, and the other thing I was determined was to not treat it as a tick box exercise, because so often this is just done for getting through the certification and not done for real.
Yeah, a bit of a means to an end. I think it's, like you say, the tick box exercise is always the comment that comes back a lot with risk in general. So it's interesting that it's there through other aspects that are impacting all these businesses, and it's just trying to get away from that whole thing of everything being a tick box exercise. But how did you approach this with your team then, taking them along with you?
Well, being the company we are, then buy-in wasn't a problem. Everybody was really, in fact, from a risk point of view, they were quite excited about it, particularly my operational people. So we did take on extra staff. We've got new ITIS capability in the company, because we recognised it was extra workload. And in particular, one person who'd come from another organisation had a lot of experience in ISO 9001. So brought a different perspective and had done internal audit and all those kind of things. So it was, it was really interesting working with everybody and getting their feed in. But the biggest problem was everybody's so busy, and I know working in large organizations, working within risk decisions, it doesn't make any difference. Everybody's busy. Yeah. Trying to find time in diaries is impossible, especially if you're trying to find time with multiple people. Yeah. And my philosophy on risk is that you've got to break down the silos. One of the problems with all the spreadsheets was that you might have a risk in supply chain that is also an IT risk. So, and it could even also be a legal risk. So it could sit under, data breach. It could sit under cyber protection, and it could also be part of, somebody in your supply chain that might cause it. Now, so which risk register do you put that one in? Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. And then you could end up with it in every one or in none of them. So one of the things that we did need was to get multiple people on the same meeting to discuss some of these things, and also just working out how to score some of these things, because one of the things we did recently in Predict was make the scoring much more comprehensive. So you could, instead of just scoring things as high, medium, low, you need to actually describe what you mean. Things like reputation, for example. Ultimately, an impact could be reputation, and sitting around a table, if that's what people are worried about, and this is where you come to C-suite kind of level, they're not, so as far as they're concerned, making sure you've got the right cyber protection in place is something that's the responsibility of somebody down the chain, but reputation is something that you're going to have to answer to the media for. But all these things are connected, all those risks are connected together. So getting everybody together and brainstorming was a challenge, just to, given that we also had a deadline for achieving our certification, so we're up against the clock. And sometimes it was also interesting trying to help people understand which hat I was wearing in a meeting, because sometimes as a CEO, you realize that people are just sitting and listening to you thinking, well, you're the CEO, so you need to tell us what to do. And the answer is, well, no, today I'm actually sitting in this meeting as the the CFO, or I might just be sitting in the meeting going, I don't know, I'm just listening to you. I'm being a risk consultant today, helping you work out how to score your risks. So it was challenging, making sure that I could help people understand. I wanted to know their perspective. I wanted to understand how they saw things. So listening, and also just helping them turn all the stones that you need to look under in order to understand all of those risks, but not making it something that was unmanageable. The one of the problems, I think, was that we, every time we turned one of those stones, there was a whole load of new questions that came out of it.
No, I can imagine.
Which was intriguing.
So how has this changed? Well, how's your experiences changed the way that you do things then? I mean, has it changed the way that you advise C-suites on implementing risk management as well?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that we realized was that we did need to restructure things, and every company is different, every organization is different. And so even though risk in its simplest form is very straightforward, you actually need to make sure that it's relevant to people. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we realized we needed to do was to roll out responsibilities down to team leads, mm-hmm. Because they're the ones that know their business, yeah. And ensure that how they were describing it was also understandable in a reporting sense. Mm-hmm. Things like joining risks together. The whole point of getting away from spreadsheets was to get into one place. Yeah. But there's no point in having it in one system, but then still stovepiping it into separate folders and not actually getting a big picture of mm-hmm. how the risks join together. Things like how key risk indicators impact causes and consequences and all of those things. And one of the things that it did do was it helped us think about how we're going to do the roadmap for our product, mm-hmm. Because when you use it yourself, there's nothing like your own internal people for being highly critical of what it does and doesn't do. It's fantastic. Yeah. So instead of just sort of listening to customers at an arm's length, it meant that I think people were starting to think a bit about the even more practical application. So we've definitely made some changes to the way we run the business, like changed our meeting structure. Mm-hmm. We realized that risk was starting to, as with some of the other things that we were needing to do, was just putting more and more meetings into people's diaries. And we went, this is too much. We cannot do this. So we streamlined our meetings. And ensured that we were very clear about what weekly meetings were for, what monthly ones and quarterly ones, or what the objectives were, and what needed to be done for those meetings. So it was really, I mean, as a small business, you have to do that because you just don't have the resources. You could spend your entire time doing this. We don't have all of those different, some organizations will have an full-time HR manager and a full-time, supply chain procurement people. And, in a small business, you don't have all those people. Therefore, there were people with multiple hats on that just found meetings got too much. So we also brought management of the whole kind of, we expanded some of the things we were doing more to bring in more about opportunities and actions and controls around how could we do things differently. So we even, part of ISO 27001 is you need to put in place an improvement log, and we started to think actually this is really just doing opportunities. I mean, some of them are, some of the improvements are where you've had a failing or something you've done wrong. But if you stop thinking about it purely as bad things and negative things and start thinking about how you can use it positively, mm-hmm. engaging people is so much easier. So all of that was a positive thing, and helping people understand that all of that is, what's the end game. It's not just about putting it together a catalogue of risk data, or doing kind of those actions you just got to do. It's all about decision making, and risk-based decision making, and all being on the same page. So that was really, really, I guess, I mean, it was sort of fun, hard work, but sometimes hard work, if it's positive and you feel like it's taking the business forward, is really good. So we had to organize, streamline, and it's definitely a work in progress. So some things we had to put on the shelf and go, right, we'll come back to that and do it later. We're trying to keep it moving along, because these initiatives often, I've seen it so many times in organizations, they put together an initiative, they sort of just about get it over the line in some way or another, and then it's all dropped because they've gone to the next thing. You actually have to keep living and breathing it.
Keep the momentum going, I think, with it, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think that as much as anything, I also have a lot more ammunition for why you wouldn't use spreadsheets, because initially I tried to do some quick and dirty stuff and it didn't work. It was just awful.
How was that? How did you find it wasn't working for you with that, doing the quick and dirty stuff with Excel?
Well, I think it just threw up more questions and confusion than it offered. The fact that we were trying to do this across different teams, and how do you keep those spreadsheets under control? I found that somebody had gone off and done some work on something, and then it's like, oh, well, somebody else is doing some stuff here as well. And I mean, it was great that people were taking initiative and getting on with it, but I then realized that it was actually just causing chaos and confusion.
You start to lose control of it all, I suppose.
Yes, I mean, you even in the central system, you've got to keep control of that too. It's configuration, but it's easier to do there because you've got all the controls and you can stop people doing things they shouldn't do. Because like we had problems with spreadsheets where people had added columns and they were, well, I need to put this data in. Well, where did that come from? Why did you do that? That's not part of the process. People went, I don't understand what to put in there. So that's the kind of problem you have with spreadsheets, is just that they become chaotic and out of control.
So you mentioned then about the experiences and how it's changed the way you do things, but has it changed the way that you might advise C-suite on implementing risk management itself?
One of the big problems is getting C-suite involved, and you need to do things from the top. But I think there are also other factors that make it difficult. So if you look at individual risks in a fairly simple form, then either as an event or as something you need to control, or then it's relatively straightforward. But unfortunately, risk isn't linear, and it's actually multidimensional. And the more people you get involved in talking about it, the more the whole thing becomes a whole kind of crazy set of links between all sorts of different things. And I think that also there are problems that people have in companies where the bigger the company, the harder it is for people to understand and possibly empathize with other people in other areas of the company, because they've had objectives flowed down to them. So they might be looking at it from an ISO 31000 point of view and saying, well, my objective is to cause no harm, or to keep people safe, or to so looking at it from an operational point of view to ensure that we don't have any data breaches or cyber breaches, or but when you start looking into all of that, as well as all the business change, the projects and initiatives and things that all have their own objectives too, and put it into a pot with the current challenges that we have with material costs and supply chain and recruitment and all of those things, then you can't just look at risk in a very simplistic way. And what you need is some guidance from the top to ensure that that you're actually looking at things in a holistic way and understanding where the business is trying to go, what challenges that they've got. So if I take, for example, some time ago working on on the 2012 Olympics, there were so many different aspects of problems that arose at that time. It was straight after the global credit crunch in 2008. It was following on from the London bombing, which happened the day the Olympics was announced, the London award. So both of those came together to, we often get these perfect storms of context where we've planned something, we're planning what we're going to do, and then the whole context changes. Now, I've worked with senior managers where they've just thrown their arms up in horror when something's happened and went, if I'd known about that, I could have done something about it. So things around the Olympics changed quite a lot over that time period before delivery in 2012. But I would say, that as a mega project was extremely well run. We enjoyed working with the, in helping build the Olympic Village, where the risks were at all levels, from the top level financing all the way down to the bottom level. How do we make sure the plumbing works and we don't have a disastrous reputation problem on the day that the opening ceremony. So they moved so much more contaminated earth off the site than I think it was a record amount, because it was built on old wartime factories, and so it was an incredibly interesting project to work on. But I think that a lot of its success was that when we call, say, C-suite, obviously the Olympics is made up of all sorts of bodies, organizations, stakeholders as well, massive stakeholders, and not everybody has been entirely happy with all of the outcomes, of course, but it was a very successful project. But I think it was down to kicking it off at the very beginning with senior level masterclass work, getting everybody on the same page, understanding why people had serious concerns about risk. So, for example, one of the issues was that Wembley Stadium had not long prior to that been a complete disaster in terms of opening very late, with not just the FA Cup final being postponed, which was absolutely terrible, but also concerts. It affected all sorts of things. So I think that there were serious concerns around that. So I think that all of that had shaped, and I've been very privileged to work with senior managers in all sorts of areas over time, and that shaped my understanding of how you approach risk. But I think that the extra experience that I've had in implementing much more operational risk, whereas a small company, you tend to manage operational risk because you're leaner, you're faster, you're more able to respond to things quickly, means that perhaps you don't do it you don't need to do it in such a rigorous way. But when you come to a large organization, then you do need to have all those audit trails in place. Another reason for not using spreadsheets. You need to be doing trend tracking month on month. You need to make sure that everything you say you're going to do, you actually do. But I think most of all, it's helping C-suite understand what people have, what challenges people have in the organization, and actually being able to work with them, ask the right questions, listen to the answers, and actually help give them some direction on this stuff. Because with risk, it's never ending in terms, you could carry on forever. Because you could go back through the, whatever it is, the Ishiguro herringbone, sort of, what caused this, and well, what caused that, and what was the cause of. So you could go back about 15 levels and get to the start of everything if you wanted to. So it's understanding and giving some guidance, and C-suite providing their vision for what risk should look like. So even if it's just like, we don't want to be another Wembley Stadium, we, in fact, one of the things on the athletes village was that C-suite said, well, we want 100% confidence. And we went, well, you can't have 100% confidence. It doesn't exist. Yeah. But what we did was we went, okay, so every month we'll bring it back to where we think we've got 100% confidence. Mm-hmm. And each month when it doesn't, when things slip, something happens, then we'll tell you what we've done to bring it back again, to bring it back on track. So I think that one of the things, whether you're big or small, actually helping people see risk work and help them do their jobs, making life more, helping people more confident. One of the things I often say is that, what do you want risk management to help you do? Well, actually, you'd like it to help you go home on time, because when things go wrong, that's when you end up working late, weekends. I don't think anybody in C-suite actually wants their workers working ridiculous hours, because you don't make good decisions, you don't do a good job to things if you're under extreme pressure all the time. And risk management helps you look into the future and solve those problems in the future. And it doesn't matter whether they're change initiatives, projects, programs, business strategic risks, or whether it's operational risks, because operational risks have just as much impact on your business, because if you have some sort of cyber incident, then it's going to stop everybody working. So those things are important, but understanding how it affects the whole company, I think, is really important. But it is different for every different company, because their risk vision is going to be different. But ultimately, risk is the same. The process and the principles of how you go about managing it is the same. But unless C-suite are involved, people in the organisation aren't really going to have the right guidance and understanding of what they should do. There is a flip side to that as well, though, is that people who are, whether you're just managing a risk, doing an action, or you're a risk professional, you also need to understand how C-suite think. And you've got to learn how to talk to them on their level, not get too much in the weeds and so on.
One thing you mentioned then is communicating between everybody, regardless of the size of the organization. But obviously a key part of that is getting the right information to the right people in a timely way. Is there any advice that you can give in terms of how this is better done, and whether this is different on smaller or large organizations?
I think the most important thing is that people can access the data, but at the right level. So, for example, C-suite cannot, I haven't got time when I'm looking at reports to see anything more than a top-down view. But I am a person who really does feel the need to see the detail when I want to know what's inside that, what's causing that. And so drill down is really important. How things are connected is really important. Being able to visualize stuff, whether it's looking at a risk analysis. In my experience, for example, I know a lot of people think that Monte Carlo analysis and doing cost and schedule analysis is overkill. Actually, in my experience, C-suite understand those pictures. They really do like looking at that. They like looking at the interactive nature of it, where you say, okay, if we mitigated this risk, or if we did that, if we knocked this out, this is what would happen. Playing what ifs. They really do get that stuff. But also being able to show how risks are linked, how they're linked together. But I think that also it's really all about decision making. So trying to make decisions, getting the right information to C-suite is about talking their language, having conversations. And in fact, conversations all the way up through the company is absolutely vital, because there's quite interesting stuff out in other blogs and things about making decisions and making decisions fast. But often I think they don't include the bit about risk, because making decisions fast is not good if you just do it on intuition. You really need to do it on well-informed data. And that's where C-suite need to have that information. If they need to drill down into it, let them drill down into it. And I think increasingly the way technology is going with digitization of everything, then C-suite should be able to click on something and see it if they want to. I as a CEO, I'm often working evenings and weekends, and if people don't want to be called up at stupid times of the day or night, I just want to be able to click on it and find it out. I don't have to go and talk to somebody. When I don't understand it, then I want to talk to them, and I expect them to be able to talk to me in a language that I understand, as well as me being able to come down to their level. So I think it's the balance is about people understanding and listening to each other, and getting the right pictures and visualizations in place. But I think there is also one of the problems that perhaps we don't have so much of in a small company is that you often get the whole kind of structure in an organization where it's very difficult to get information to the right people quickly enough, and the right risk-based information, so that they know the potential scenarios, the different possibilities, and most importantly for C-suite, you don't just take a problem to them, you actually take the problem and the answer. So you need to have the ability to tap into to other teams, to other people in other bits of the organization, and I really think that there is probably a need to overhaul governance in large organizations, because I think governance has got to a point where it's often has become rather too big and bulky in order to get those decisions made fast, because you have to go through endless chains to get there. Now, I totally understand how important the governance and the whole audit trail of everything is, but I think that there's something in the future that could be done to make those lines of reporting much more simple, because we haven't got weeks or months to make decisions these days. We've got days. We know that from how many prime ministers we've had in the UK over the last recent history.
Last 3 months or so, I think.
But even in the last 5 or 6 years. But I think that organisations would do well to look at how their reporting lines are, how they can improve on that. And I think risk has got a lot to help there, because actually, as a rule, when I'm trying to make a really important decision, if I've got all the information, then generally I'm comfortable, I'm confident. If I haven't got all the information, I'm really feeling very nervous about it. I almost never make a very important decision on the same day it's asked of me, but I usually sleep on it and I make it first thing in the morning, when it's fresh in my mind, and I've been able to eliminate I've managed to separate the wheat from the chaff and actually work out what to do. But you can only make those good decisions if you've got all the risk. What's the knock-on effect? If I make the decision, what's the knock-on effect next week, next month, next year? And actually tying governance and that whole reporting chain into the way you structure your risk is a very important piece, I think. Being able to look at your risk register and say, okay, there's a crisis in pensions, or there's a crisis in cybersecurity. I just want to pull up all the risks to do with that, and then sort them in a way which is meaningful on a particular criteria. That's the beauty of having the risks all in one place, that you can actually get the enormity of it, and you can also look at stuff and say, what's missing? Because if you look at it, you don't believe it. And I think senior managers really do generally have a good understanding of their business. They just don't have the data at their fingertips to be able to make those decisions. So I think it's really about making the digital transformation that everybody claims they're going through a reality, and be able to get to that information quickly.
Excellent bits of advice there, Val. So thank you very much for that. So is there any other bits of advice that you would give to managers trying to implement risk across their organizations?
Yes, I think, well, we probably covered quite a lot, but maybe it'd be useful just to bring this together, because I think engagement is a really difficult problem in
Mm-hmm.
organizations. So you might have got the right structures, you've got good governance, you've everybody is understands the reasons why they're doing risk, and you've got your vision in place, all of those sort of things, but you still have problems with engagement. And I think that number one is absolutely, you've got to get C-suite engaged, and they need to be ready to delve into a level of detail where asking questions in the right way makes people think actually they do understand what I'm doing, and they understand the problems I've got, because problem solving is a collective thing. It's a very enjoyable thing to do if you get together and solve a problem. And there's almost no problems I've come across in any organization that I've worked with that was either unknown to the organization before it happened. Don't let people tell you that it was, oh my goodness, that's a surprise, nobody saw that coming. Somebody saw it coming, they just didn't mention it. So that comes to the second point, I think, is that you need honesty, truth, and make it safe for people to take risks. Make it safe for people to put their hand up, because that way you will really get a forewarning of those problems. And in my experience, I've never met somebody in C-suite who didn't want to know the problems. They don't like surprises, so don't give C-suite surprises. Make sure that there is I suppose people will say, yeah, what you're talking about is culture, and it is really. Get the right culture around risk, and that starts from the top, and flows down. Finding time in people's diaries is always going to be a problem, but if you can work out strategies to do that, and often it means simple things like not having risk management reviews, but having risk reviews, but even trying to get rid of those and embedding risk into everything you do. So now with each of my team leads and managers that I have meetings with, on the agenda, I've got a link to the risk register, and we look at the risk register every week. And I say, what are you doing about that? Have you got any problems? We don't spend too long on it, but it's just a work in progress. So keeping it going within the existing meetings you have, and trying to embed it rather than have separate risk meetings, unless you've got a big brainstorming session, when you do need to have a whole risk meeting. Try to include the positive side of risk, not just negative. And by that I don't just mean opportunities. You can be positive about taking risk. You can, as long as you've got everybody on board, and that means across the silos again. Because sometimes a risk that an opportunity that you implement in one place could be somebody else's risk. And I can also assure you, and I did a recent webinar on opportunity and innovation, and senior managers, C-suites, don't like opportunities any more than they like risks happening, unless they know in advance. They don't like, it's all the surprises, and I've known opportunities to backfire spectacularly in organizations. I'm not trying to put people off doing opportunities. I'm saying, go for it, but do it in full view. Don't, because people often hide opportunities away. And you need to find risk champions in the business. C-suite ought to recognize and value those people. I do my best not to show shock horror if somebody mentions something to me that I think, oh my goodness me, because I think it gives a bad vibe to people. It's the whole shoot the messenger thing. Don't make people think that if they put their hand up, then they're going to be the one that receives the negative flack. And again, I kind of despair when you hear about the fact that whistleblowers, it's always career limiting. It's about time that stopped. That whistleblowers could do things in confidence, that it would hopefully enhance their careers, not end it in many cases. And that's where I think C-suite can learn from that, because unfortunately you need to know this stuff, even if it's unpalatable. All the way down to the bottom of the company, you can have people who know things that you need to know at C-suite level. All those structures and challenges of getting it to where it needs to go is always going to be difficult. And there's no getting around that, really. In a small or a large company, there's still stuff that you wish you'd known earlier. But the better risk system you have, and the more risk intelligence, we call it, that you can feed into your organization, then the more likely you're going to be able to deal with problems earlier, before they really become major issues. And the more you're on top of problems, the more opportunities and innovation you can achieve, because you are in control of your organization. I feel like the implementation of ISO 27001 and all process procedures we put in place, because we didn't do it as a tick box exercise, because we said this has got to mean something. I don't want anybody spending any minute of their working life wasting time filling in something. One of the rules we put in at the beginning was, if you think you're doing something that's a waste of time, talk to me, and I'll explain why it's important. And if you can convince me it's not important, we're going to stop doing it, because we haven't got time to do that. And it's about having those kind of sensible, risk intelligent discussions about how you go about your general working life. And what I'd like to think is that the risk manager becomes the CEO's best friend, or the person in C-suite's best friend, because they know it's somebody they can trust. They become a trusted advisor to the business, not the person who's the bearer of bad news. Which is where risk is seen as the red card. It's not about a red card. It's actually why you have brakes on your car, is so you can go faster. It's about powering your business. Being positive about risk is actually very empowering in an organization, and it helps retain staff too.
It does. It's a great bit of advice there, Val. So thank you very much for that. So that kind of wraps things up really for today, Val. And thank you very much for coming along. It's been a really interesting chat and discussion, and I think that a lot of people are going to take away a huge amount of information from this one. But our regular listeners will be familiar with a bit of tradition we have around here. So if you could give yourself a piece of advice that to yourself at the beginning of your career that you've picked up along the way that you didn't know back then, what would it be?
I think probably it would be to say, don't be apologetic about working in risk and risk management, because I think for years I had people, I allowed people to kind of try and put me back in my box and go in the corner, do your stuff there, please. Don't bother us. I even had people say, well, tell you what, go away and come back 2 weeks later and show me something amazing. It's like, what? I did decline that one, actually. But being bold, being positive. Don't be afraid to talk to somebody a few levels higher up than you. The best thing that can happen is for the CEO to talk to the cleaner, in my opinion. Why not?
Definitely.
Be proud to be a problem solver, looking to the future. Find time to do that, to be what I call risk intelligence. So actually, for somebody to say, risk, please, could you, I haven't got time today. It's like, answering, well, don't you want to be risk intelligent? Why wouldn't you do this? Because it'll make your life better, your organization's life better, everybody's life better. And so it's actually, as a risk professional, it's a great career to be in. I've loved all 30 plus years I've been in it. I never tire of it. I'm always learning new things. So yes, I think if I could have been perhaps less apologetic, or allowed people, was more pushed back on people more who tried to imply that I was just an add-on, to the day job, and actually went, no, this is important, and it's really positive, and it's really great stuff to do.
Yeah, it's, again, another great bit of advice, Val, so thank you. So yeah, wrapping up really here for the moment. If there's any way, if anybody wants to reach out to you and discuss anything that's been mentioned today on the podcast, or anything else in general, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, or probably LinkedIn. And I'm lucky, I've got a fairly easy name to find. Just if you just search for Val Jonas, I think you should find me. But that's my LinkedIn tag. You can also go to our website, which is www.riskdecisions.com, and also that's my email address is also at riskdecisions.com. So yeah, whichever way you want. We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your ideas and thoughts. Any extra things you think, that advice you would give on how to help engage C-suite, how to do things as C-suite, because it really is the most important thing in an organization, that risk is supported and driven top down with a risk intelligent risk vision.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much again, Val. It's been great.
Good. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening.